Welcome to Midnight Murmurs, where the darkest corners of reality come to light. Tonight, we're diving into the terrifying world of true, Home Alone horror stories. Imagine being in the comfort of your own home, the place where you feel safest. But something sinister lurks in the shadows. As you listen to these tales, remember, sometimes reality is far scarier than any nightmare. Keep your doors locked and your lights on, because these three true stories will make you question what really goes bump in the night. Lisa had always felt safe in her family's old Victorian house. It had stood strong for over a century, sheltering generations of her family, and the familiar creaks and groans of its wooden structure had always been comforting. Her parents were away for the weekend, and she decided to make the most of her solitude. She watched her favorite horror movies late into the night, the flickering light of the TV, the only illumination in the dark living room. Around 2 a.m., feeling the weariness in her eyes, she decided it was time to go to bed. She turned off the TV and began her walk up the narrow, creaky staircase. As she passed the long hallway leading to her bedroom, a faint noise caught her attention. It was barely perceptible, but it sounded like a soft, rhythmic breathing. Curious, she stood still, holding her breath to listen more closely. The breathing continued, heavy and labored, coming from beneath the floorboards. A chill ran down her spine. Her rational mind tried to dismiss it as the sound of the old house settling, or maybe an animal in the walls. Yet something about the sound felt disturbingly human. She crouched down and pressed her ear against the floor. The breathing became clearer, more defined. It was not just the sound of air moving. It had a rasping quality, like someone trying to breathe quietly but failing. Panicked, Lisa scrambled to her feet and grabbed her phone. She called her next-door neighbor, Mr. Thompson, an elderly man who had known her family for years. Within minutes, he was at her door with a flashlight and a crowbar. Together, they moved the old rug and started prying up the floorboards. Each creak of the wood heightened Leah's anxiety. Underneath, they discovered a small, concealed crawl space. The air was musty and stale, filled with the scent of rotting food. Inside, there was a tattered sleeping bag, some dirty clothes, and a notebook. Mr. Thompson picked up the notebook and flipped through the pages, his face paling with each entry he read. The final entry, scribbled in jagged handwriting, sent a shiver down Lisa's spine. "I can hear her walking. I just need to wait until she falls asleep." They immediately called the police, who arrived and began a thorough investigation. It turned out that a drifter had been living in the crawl space for weeks, slipping in and out while Lisa was at work, watching her through tiny holes in the floorboards. The thought that he had been so close, listening to her every move, waiting for his chance, was a nightmare that would haunt her for years. James was a college student, renting a small one-bedroom apartment just off campus. It was a modest place, but it suited him well. He enjoyed the freedom of living alone, away from the hustle and bustle of dorm life. It was a stormy Friday night, and James was preparing for a big exam coming up. He sat at his desk, surrounded by textbooks and notes, trying to focus over the sound of the rain pounding against the window. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a shadow moving outside. At first, he brushed it off, as the wind playing tricks with the trees. But as he glanced up, he saw a figure standing motionless just beyond the glow of the street lamp outside his window. It was too dark to make out any details, but the silhouette was clearly human. James felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. He turned back to his books, telling himself it was probably just a neighbor or a passerby. Minutes ticked by, and the figure remained unmoving. James tried to concentrate on his studying, but his eyes kept drifting back to the window. The figure hadn't moved an inch. Suddenly, it took a deliberate step forward, coming closer into the dim light. The rain slashed against the glass, distorting the view. But James could see the figure's face now. It was gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to be staring directly at him. A sense of dread washed over him. He quickly stood up, pulled the curtains shut, and turned off the lights in his apartment, plunging the room into darkness. He stood by the window, listening, his heart pounding in his ears. The rain had muffled most sounds, but he could hear something else now, a soft, rhythmic tapping at the glass. It wasn't frantic or loud, just a slow, methodical tap, 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 as if someone was gently knocking. He grabbed his phone with trembling hands and dialed 911, whispering his situation to the operator. They assured him that officers were on their way. As he waited in the darkness, the tapping stopped, replaced by the sound of footsteps squelching in the mud outside his window, moving toward the back of the building. James didn't dare move from his spot until he heard the sirens approaching. When the police arrived, they found no one outside, but there were muddy footprints leading from James's window around to the back of the building, where they disappeared into the nearby woods. They searched the area but found nothing. The officers advised James to keep his doors locked and to call them if he noticed anything unusual. That night, as James tried to sleep, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a text from an unknown number. The message contained a single image: James staring out of his window, curtains partially open, with the caption, "I see you." His blood ran cold. Whoever had been outside was not only watching him, but was close enough to take a picture and send it to him. He spent the rest of the night huddled in his room, lights on, waiting for the dawn to break. Megan had just moved into her new apartment, a small but cozy place in an older building. It was her first time living alone, and she relished the peace and quiet. The building had character, with its old-fashioned elevator and creaky wooden floors. The neighbors were friendly enough, and Megan felt comfortable settling in. For the first few nights, everything was perfect. She unpacked her belongings, arranged her furniture, and began to feel at home. Then, one evening, as she was brushing her teeth before bed, Megan heard a faint whispering sound. It was so soft that she thought it might just be her imagination. She turned off the faucet and stood still, listening. The whispering continued, barely audible, but unmistakable. It seemed to be coming from the walls. Confused, Megan pressed her ear against the bathroom wall, straining to make out the words. "Megan, Megan." The voice was a low, almost inaudible murmur, but it was clearly saying her name. Megan's heart skipped a beat. She pulled back, glancing around the bathroom as if expecting to see someone there. She shook her head, trying to rationalize the sound. Maybe it was a trick of the plumbing or the ventilation system. Maybe it was a neighbor's voice carrying through the walls. Over the next few nights, the whispering persisted, growing louder and more distinct. It wasn't just her name anymore. The whispers seemed to be having conversations, though the words were too jumbled to make sense of. Sometimes they would laugh softly. Other times it sounded like they were crying. The voices moved from room to room, always just out of sight, always coming from the walls. One night, unable to take it anymore, Megan called the building's maintenance team. They came and inspected the apartment, checking the pipes, the ventilation, and the electrical systems. They found nothing unusual and suggested that maybe the sounds were just the old building settling or noise from the adjacent apartments. Megan tried to believe them, but the whispers didn't stop. Desperate for answers, Megan hired a professional to inspect the apartment. The man was thorough, using special equipment to check for hidden issues. After hours of searching, he discovered a small, concealed panel behind the living room wall, hidden beneath layers of wallpaper. When they pried it open, they found a narrow crawl space. Inside was an old radio transmitter, rigged with a microphone and speakers, set up to play a recording on a loop. As they examined the setup, Megan noticed a piece of paper taped to the wall inside the crawl space. It was a note, written in neat handwriting. "You shouldn't have moved here. I'm always watching." Megan felt a wave of nausea. Someone had gone to great lengths to install this device, to create the illusion of whispering voices. The thought that someone had been watching her, manipulating her environment to frighten her, was terrifying. Megan packed her things and moved out the next day. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even after she left the building, for months, she had nightmares of voices calling her name, of unseen eyes tracking her every move. She never found out who set up the transmitter or why they targeted her, but the experience left her feeling vulnerable and haunted, a shadow of her former self. You've just heard 3 true stories of what can happen when you're alone at home. As you turn off your lights tonight, just remember, Sometimes the real monsters are much closer than you think. If these stories kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a tale from the shadows. And if you have your own chilling encounter to share, drop it in the comments below. Who knows, your story might just be the next one we whisper on Midnight Murmurs.